We have a lot of focus on onboarding within the team, and it's been a foundational piece of the way that we view new team members coming on board. There have been a lot of conversations lately about like re-onboarding and like, should we keep like reassessing our skills or like reinvesting in our own skill set to get better and better and more comfortable with things. And so we've got this thing that you've been overseeing, which is the onboarding checklist, if you want to call it that. And it would be good just to walk through like, what is that? Why do we use it? How does it work? And go from there.
Some background that I think is helpful. There's the onboarding checklist or project itself, which is the actual, tactical tasks that need to be completed to get onboarded. Some of those are thematic, where we're talking about culture or handbook or principles or values. Some of those are a little bit more practical, of like, here's your Zoom settings that are going to help set you up for success and make sure you're configured the right way across all your apps. But there's something deeper within that, which is this is really a self-directed project. And it's in place to teach people how we work. This is for a lot of people the first time they're coming to a distributed company where things are asynchronous, where they have to schedule their day, where they have to learn how to batch tasks together. And so we are directive and prescriptive on our expectations for day one, for week one, for month one. But within that, there's a lot of flexibility for people to figure out how to do this themselves and really practice building their own working style. And so that applies for all levels of seniority, whether or not someone's coming in at an entry level role and this is their first job out of undergrad, or if this is someone who's been in industry for 10 or 15 years. We work differently here. We want to use onboarding as a proxy for communicating how we work. And so it's really just gets people into the cadence and the working style that we've got. And so I like that kind of underlying theme to it that maybe isn't apparent right up front.
One of the cool things too is as we look at the board, it's not sequential. This is set up so that, as you said, it's self-directed. People can essentially go through it at their own pace. And if they see something that it's not about checking off boxes, it's about the thought process that goes into like downloading all this information into their brain and really getting immersed in the company. And so if they see something that's like on the latter part of the like month one tasks, but they want to start thinking about it, let's just say it's like some functional strategy doc, it might actually be good for them to go, I'm not going to write that now, but this, I'm going to keep this in the back of my mind. So everything else I learn influences the way that I execute this thing.
Onboarding really starts from when they sign the offer. And that's when we want to start providing context and information. And in fact, this just keeps going on and on. It starts from when they get into the interview process and start the recruiting process and get exposed to our docs. But let's start here from when they've signed an offer. They land on this page, which gives them all the information they need to get started between the day they sign their offer and day one when they show up to the office, so to speak. And it outlines expectations of when their accounts will be created, how equity is granted, what steps they need to take in order to get to that point. So already we're training a few things. One, working in Notion. So we move the email communications out of email and into Notion. And so we start communicating here. And then we give a preview of what they can do before they start. If there's books to read, articles to focus on, specific areas for their function or role, we lay that out all in this doc so that they can get a head start. None of this is required. We don't want people to have to do work before they even start, but a lot of people do ask for information on what they can do to get started and how they can get ahead. And so this is just answering that question proactively.
Yeah, one of the cool things about this doc is, I guess, is part of like our communication values, if you want to call it that, where nothing is ever left open-ended until the loop is closed. That meaning, what are the next steps? What are the next steps? Like there's always next steps. And so we try to eliminate that, because put yourself in the shoes of somebody new. Like we were all new at one time. And a lot of times, naturally, people just will email, they'll say, we're really excited to have you come on board. And that's like the end of an email. And then the candidate is sitting there and they're like, okay, like, I know I'm starting in 2 weeks. What are the next steps? What you want to do from a comms perspective is be like, as the communicator, to be like, I will send you an email by Wednesday of this week. Like that's the next steps, and with the next steps. So we try to eliminate that by having this doc so that there is never a gap in someone's mind of like what they should do next. And that's what sending this doc provides, is like closing the loop on email communications and saying, you are now being onboarded to the company so that they can, as you said before, really be self-driven in walking through onboarding themselves at their own pace and and taking things on as they go.
Yep. And just taking the perspective of a candidate, you've just signed an offer, you're really excited to join a company that you've seen pieces of, but like you want to know what you can do to get started, and you're working remotely. So for the folks for whom that's new, do I get a co-working space? How do I set up my desk? Do I use my own laptop? How do I get the tools I need? What's the AV configuration? What can I expense? A lot of questions that sometimes you're too afraid to ask, or just like
Mhm.
don't really have a time and place in like the offer process itself, which we've done our best to make that a friendly process. So this is just answering those questions up front, and just creating a process that's welcoming and is kind of true to our values.
So you are the touch point hypothetically, and somebody's like, I'm bugging Ms. I don't want to keep bugging Ms. about what are the insurance policies. Can I get a co-working space? What can I expense? Especially you don't want to like step on toes is sort of the mindset of somebody coming on board is they don't want to take your time. They don't want to seem like they're asking low value questions. And so we try to mitigate that as much as possible where it's like if you go through this thing and you can't find the answer, of course, feel free to reach out anytime, but most like 95 plus percent of the questions you have are probably answered somewhere in this doc. And by allowing people to explore it, it does make them feel maybe more trusting in the sense of like, hey, everything's very transparent and here it is, it's answered. People care about what my experience is coming on board. I think that's what it feels like for a new candidate.
This is the onboarding checklist. And right up front, you see this Kanban board. There's a few different columns in here. There's day one, weeks 1 through 2, and month 1. Within each of these columns, there are cards, which are discrete tasks, and they're categorized by a few different things. One, they're categorized by the area. So it's just like an administrative and tool setup card or task. Is this a culture related card? Is it role specific, product education? And so we kind of batch them that way. And then we also batch them by depth. Is this a shallow, medium, or deep task? Will this take you a bunch of focused time and you should kind of clear your calendar for it? Or can you knock out 5 or 6 of these in a row right off the bat? And they range in everything from the super tactical and low level of like, set up your Zoom account. Here's the exact Zoom configuration we want you to use. Here's how you get your license. Here's your settings for HD video, for low light, for sound. And all of this is kind of just laid out so that there's no questions and you get set up for success. And then there's some longer ones like Threads, which is our main communication platform. There's a lot of reading and training to do to understand how this platform works. So you'll find Looms with an overview of the platform. You'll find long form documents that explain how we use this tool. And all of these link out to different places within our Notion database with different documents that explain and have context, description, background discussion around what these tools are. So immediately you're thrust right into where the work is actually happening across the team itself. So this isn't exclusively onboarding material. The onboarding project just launches you into the right places and kind of calls your attention to where you need to be focusing. So that's what this looks like at a high level. The goal here is to get certain tasks done that need to be done for setup. The rest of it is really infusing our culture and kind of like enculturating someone into how we work and how we think. Some of that is done by reading the memos that we think are important. And so we'll call out specific Looms that have been recorded along the way. We'll link to specific discussions or Friday fireside chats that we've had as a team. This lets someone get up to speed and catch up on what's going on.
When coming on to a team, no matter what, it's overwhelming, right? Like there's always going to be a bit of intimidation, like people are nervous to start a new role, and that's natural. Coming into a company that has a lot of documentation, that being like we have a ton of documentation, it can be very, very overwhelming because you see all these tasks.
Yeah. So the way we've scaled that is the way we scale everything with video content. So instead of meeting Mike Caney and getting a walkthrough of content, here's Mike Caney walking through the content wiki in a Loom, right? And we'll refresh this every once in a while and link to the most recent memo for that area so that, within 20 minutes, you can catch up on everything content, understand who's leading it. And those interpersonal connections and relationships are still important. We just build them in different ways, right? We do that through the welcome cafe hour where like people are interacting with one another socially, but not necessarily someone walking through the area of what they oversee. It's a time commitment that's relieved for the new hire, right? You remove all the scheduling and all the kind of sync requirements. And you also remove it for the existing team, which, when I was at larger companies in the past, half of your time is just spent meeting with new people who come on and repeating the same thing over and over again through the onboarding program to teach them what you do and when to reach out to your team, how to work together. And so, yeah, all these were previously like, you should then meet with this person, but the team is just growing a little bit too large to do that. Something else that I think is important to call out, these are all of our expectations for getting started. We're also pretty clear about our anti-expectations during, let's say, within month one, right? What we really want to do is have people focus on understanding how we work, on understanding the culture, on understanding the different processes and approach to work. We don't necessarily want them jumping into a bunch of work-related assignments in the beginning because you only get to onboard once the full way. And as soon as you start dipping your toe into the work itself, the onboarding becomes a second thought, and you're not going to go back to this on week 3 and pick up where you left off. And so it's really, really important that the early stages are set up to specifically focus on onboarding. It's incredibly important to us that our culture is preserved and that people don't bring bad habits or old habits, they might be good ones, with them from the past. We really want to rethink that, make sure they understand how we work, and not just inherit whatever previous company's baggage is coming along. So we've set out to make a pretty intentional culture, and very thorough onboarding is the best way we can preserve and reinforce that. So the anti-expectation of start getting things shipped is definitely set clear. This is the priority, regardless of level of seniority, is to get through this project thoroughly, spend the time with it, sleep full nights so that you retain this information, because there's a lot to feel like you're drinking out of a fire hose early on. And so that's an important part of this.
Yeah, it's also hard too because people come into an organization and naturally you want to add value right away. And so you have to like refrain from doing that. You have to disconnect your mind from that being a thing. Like you can't trick yourself in going, well, I know that Ms. said to do this, but it's really a test. He's really testing me to see if I'm actually going to add value while doing onboarding or instead of doing onboarding. And so we across the team, we reinforce everybody promotes the same mantra. Like we all speak the same language. Don't worry about anything else other than onboarding. The only thing that we changed with it was we used to say, "Hey, do this for a month," and now we've adjusted it a bit to say, it's okay to, like, after 2 weeks, start working on projects because there were 2 parts of it. One was, it's like having a tiger in a cage. Like, after 2 weeks, everyone is just like, "I want out of this thing." And then the other side is that there was just a lot of projects that people would start getting looped into, even if we tried not to. And so then we were doing everyone a disservice by saying, "Don't focus on these things. Ignore these messages that we're sending you. You can address them later." And that became a bit of a tension between what we were saying and what we were doing. And so we just said, let's make it 2 weeks. Let's set that expectation and we'll start working, knowing that you're still onboarding for a month, but that's where you're going to shift into tactical mode after 2 weeks versus just being in onboarding mode.
What is important is that for a lot of the functional leadership roles, and even a lot of anyone's role really, one of the first things that they do is start writing a memo that's going to define what their project area looks like. I think taking the time to write your first memo to define your strategy and approach is really helpful for a few reasons. One, it gives the team an idea of what you're going to be working on. It lets them have input and create the discussion. We've spoken about the role through the hiring and the recruiting process, but once you're in the mix, it starts to take on a different shape and get much more practical and pragmatic. And so that's where that can happen. The third thing that happens here is that you write your first memo. You learn that we use Notion and not Google Docs. You start to understand our formatting. You start to put together the template. Where does it live in the memos database? And so part of it is also just learning how we work and how we approach the deep work process, the discussion and communication and collaboration on the product, and then translating that into actual action and project form. The best way to do that is to start with this memo. And so by week 2, you're already excited about starting to get some of your work and starting to see your course of what you're going to take on. And that's a really good way to start making that transition where you're still in onboarding mode, you're still exploring, but you're writing your first, strategic piece that's going to then inform your work.
Yeah, the memo thing is really interesting too because it gives everyone on the team an opportunity to see how a person communicates their ideas, right? Everyone's going to have a little bit different style. It gives everyone the opportunity to give feedback on it, and then the person who writes a memo to receive that feedback. But the nice thing is, let's assume, for argument's sake, there are 10 core memos across the company. Like maybe there are 10 more role specific ones. So whomever is working closest with that new team member, only worry about these 20 memos, hypothetically. And a person goes and they write their first like strategy memo, how they're going to approach work. And the team feedback, like all of this collective knowledge comes together and gives like really good objective feedback of maybe challenging some of the assumptions or adding to it by going, hey, here are like 4 more docs on this one point you had here. Check them out. They might be helpful to like evolve your thinking, or we've already done a bunch of exploration work here. That might cut your time down from even needing to do that if this is helpful. And that it becomes a mechanism for discovery, helping people to onboard further and then discover even more information that's helpful to their functional role.
There's a line between saying, go be self-sufficient, everything's documented, find it on your own. And the other end of the spectrum, which is, hey, what are the memos that I need to read? Like, please hand me everything that's relevant to my role. And somewhere in between, it's like, do your research, understand what exists. And then it's okay to ask for help and like ask for guidance from people who have been here for months, who know that memo that was written 4 months ago that might be relevant in this case, of thoughts and ideas that we've had. Like, you're not expected to know those things. And it's very hard to find that just like when you're given a carte blanche memo database, right?
Mhm.
And so it's okay to ask for help, but do some of the legwork, understand what has been done already, and don't expect that all to just be served up in the beginning. Something that's important to note is this task here. Set up a meeting schedule with your manager for week 1. So this is sync meetings. We actually do mean this. We have one-on-ones between managers and reports. And so, during the first week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it's really important that you do get some face time just to keep you on track. We don't just want you to like start a job and feel like it's entirely in the virtual world and there's no people on the other side of it. And so managers and direct reports are expected to connect at least every other day for the first week or two, just to make sure that the simple questions are being asked, that we're pointing the right direction, that we're keeping our eyes open for any things that might be extremely helpful or where you might be going off track. And so again, example, we're not purists. Like, we'll get on the phone and do the sync meeting as part of onboarding someone. It's really, really important to get that right. And so this is an example of where we lean into sync video format. And some of these can do phone calls too, to keep someone on track in the beginning.
Mhm. It's an opportunity for new team members to ask questions. Like, let's just use an in-person environment. You might want to ask somebody, "Hey, where is the kitchen? Where can I find this?" You're not going
Yeah.
to just keep emailing somebody those, but you're going to maybe build up a list of all these tactical small questions that you just want to bang out one. But the other thing is, it gives people an opportunity to not just talk about the work, but to really get to know someone, and getting to know each other's character and the way that they communicate and the way that they uh, open up the door to ask questions. And so, if we don't have these sync meetings, like as much as we say we don't meet, if we don't have them, then that is going to be a hard sense of rapport to build, I think.
Yeah, it's trust building, it's relationship building, it's rapport building, and then there's an element of like the unspoken communication that happens, and also the unspoken cultural aspects that like maybe we don't capture in onboarding, that you just have this question about that isn't something that you'd write a thread about, or like it's kind of difficult to phrase it like, hey, how do people approach XYZ? It's very easy to do that verbally, and so we want to offer the opportunity to do that, which brings up this thing. Let me just kind of pull up this culture handbook. The goal of this is distinct from our principles and our values, but this is really just like the kind of the smaller, finer details of how we work and how our culture operates. And so this is a really good starting point for new hires, because it just is an overview of our culture generally on all the little notes and kind of like all the topics that we've discussed as a team, from disagree and commit to like being really good at your tools, how we value time, how we use our calendars. All of that's maybe where in other places it might not really be enumerated as clearly. We're very, very clear about that. And so, for example, I want to pull up the like how we manage time and calendars, which gets linked from the onboarding. Really, really specific of just like how we think about things and how not to do things. Like the whole like, oh, I'll just throw some time in your calendar. It's like, no, we actually don't use that phrase. We don't do that. We respect each other's time in these kinds of ways. So all of those things where like, you might be shy to ask, or you might be just assumed at other companies. where we just explain that very clearly and explicitly. Like, hey, if someone sends you a link because you asked for a question and it was already documented, that's not disrespectful. That's just how we communicate, and that's the expectation that we have. So we spell
Mhm.
all of that out really, really explicitly in this document. One more thing that I think is interesting is that we're really prescriptive about preferences and settings early on. So for week one and month one, we're going to be prescriptive about how we'd like you to use push notifications and email
Mhm.
and how you should communicate. And so, we have an opinion on the best way to do that as a company. We realize people's preferences might look different over time. And so, within a few months from now, if you want to check your email every 5 minutes, feel free to go for it. But in month one, we're going to ask you to use an app called Mailman, which is going to batch deliver your emails at a few times during the day so that you don't get into the habit of dopamine email checking. We ran this wacky experiment a few weeks ago where a few of us from the team only communicated with Looms for an entire week to really test the bounds of that medium, understand where it broke, understand where it added value that we didn't previously understand, and also just get really, really comfortable with the medium, with just recording videos a ton since we do that so much. And so we added this task to the onboarding. So week 3, you're only communicating with video. Like, that's the expectation. It's going to be weird, but we'd like for you to try this. And that's a good way to just kind of like enculturate someone early on.
Like now, once you get comfortable using it, your brain shifts in the way it thinks. So it's like why, and we've got videos on like how and when to use Loom in itself, but recording a Loom of something very hard to articulate, it might be a direct message to you about something. And you're like, Miz, I've been thinking a lot about X, Y, and Z. And it might take 20 minutes to type this out where you can decipher this information and it feels valuable. But if somebody just records, it's not even a screen sharing of like what they're working on. It's just like them talking to the camera. That in itself is so much more helpful for you because 3 minutes on 2x, it's like, oh, that didn't take you very long to go through. You're able to think about it, understand the sentiment, understand the position, and you can reply back with like, same page, let's do it. And that just makes both team members more efficient in time.
It's building the habit, it's building the mental muscle. The same can be said of delegation, right? So we use the Athena team to outsource a bunch of kind of like routine or repetitive tasks that aren't a great use of time for the folks we've hired. And so we have an entire team of EAs dedicated to us to offload all of that work. And so getting used to delegation takes a lot of practice, but within month 1, we want you to delegate at least a few tasks to your Athena EA so that you understand how that works. And so there's a whole set of resources around that. And you can't mark this task complete until you've done that. And so this is really teaching how we work. It's here's how to delegate, which really takes a lot of training and practice.
Yeah, setting the expectation of always thinking about opportunities to scale your own time. That's down to like the Athena task. Removing something you alluded to before was removing ingrained habits. That might be like checking your email all the time, or if you come from an environment where sync communication is very much, it's not necessarily the behavior, it's the expectation. We don't work that way. And so we're saying, make sure your notification settings are set to 1, 2, and 3. Here's how you are going to start communicating. And we do want to be prescriptive about that because the more team members that come on board, it becomes a very slippery slope of like, oh, well, if enough people are defaulting to sync communication or what seems async, but it's sort of like back and forth every 5 minutes, let's just sync. And so we're trying to say like, no, let's get comfortable with this idea of batching communications at like bookended times in the day. And we're still figuring out these mechanisms, these communication mechanisms, but find a way to say, hey, this is urgent, it's important. Let's sync up on this one for 7 minutes because that's more efficient than us going back and forth for 3.5 hours today.
Yeah. And then the last thing that I'll say for now is that I forgot what I was going to say for now.
The last thing that you said for now was that.
Yeah.